Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another evening of New Yorkers for Safer Streets. We hope you joined us recently for our fireside chats with elected officials, and we have more coming up for you in the next few weeks to talk about COVID and the post-recovery and the path forward in New York City. Tonight, we're really excited. We have our first candidate forum where we're going to get to know the candidates for the District 73 State Assembly. And so that's Upper East Side, Sutton Place, Murray Hill. Who am I missing? Let's see. I know I'm missing somebody in there. Midtown East, Carnegie Hill. So thank you for everyone showing up tonight. We have almost 70 families joining us tonight, which is super exciting. And we want to be quick and to the point because we know you're busy. I have a dog on my lap and 2 kids that I'm bribing with TV tonight to stay out of the way. So we know we have a lot of parents and we're busy. I want to welcome Cameron Koffman, who is the challenger for the Democratic primary for the 73rd District for State Assembly. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate you guys having me on and doing this type of forum. And I want to make it very clear, I think that the work that your organization has done is really impressive in a coordinated effort for families to have a voice politically and to say, you know, these are our concerns for our community. This is what we've noticed, and we're making data-based recommendations to our elected officials, and we are activating ourselves politically. And you know, as you said, everybody is busy, kids to take care of, parents to take care of, jobs, and so many other things. It's very hard to also have time to kind of get involved in the political process. So the fact that you guys have still made time to do that and that you're working to provide a forum for your organization's members, for all these families, the backbone of our community, to hear from candidates, I think is great. And it's a good testament to our democracy right now.
Thanks, and welcome again. We'll also be hearing a statement and some quotes from Dan Court, who declined to participate in a live Q&A tonight, but I'm very persistent. So since I feel we need to hear from both candidates, I pushed and pushed, and we were able to get some question and answers from Assembly Member Court, who is the incumbent for the 73rd District for State Assembly. And we'll go through that towards the end of the night, but to keep it short, I also want to welcome Pamela, who is a fellow Upper East Side mom and part of the leadership team, who is also passionate about, you know, having safer streets and a better livable NYC for kids and our families in this city moving forward. Welcome, Pamela.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me.
All right, without further ado, let's kick off the night. I just want to let anyone know who doesn't know who we are, New Yorkers for Safer Streets. We officially started and came together in October of 2019 in response to a shooting that occurred on the Upper West Side, realizing that 10 of us in the room felt things had really changed in New York City and something was different. We started meeting with different commanding officers at different precincts throughout Manhattan and realized it wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact. Crime was rising, the streets were less safe, quality of life was declining. So now in 6 months, we're over 3,000 Manhattan families strong, and even some new Brooklyn and Queens families who care about quality of life and safety in the city. So what are we doing? We started out meeting with elected officials saying, these are the things that we care about: quality of life, declining safety, rising crime. And we want our government to be more transparent. We want them to include the public when they enact laws. And we want them to address things that aren't being addressed, particularly our homeless situations, our unsheltered mentally ill. And also, when they launch something like bail reform, to balance that with public safety. What are the services in place to ensure our public is safe? So we met with them and we addressed these items. We're very much a forward thinking, you know, solution oriented group, and we want to work with any elected official that's willing to meet with us and say, what can we do about these issues? What can we do to make New York City more livable for families and our children? As time went on and we met with many people you can see here, we've attended precinct meetings, community board meetings. We realized that parents just don't have the time to attend 3 meetings a week, 3 times a month. We started meeting with city council members and sharing, raising awareness to what the issues were for families. We met with state officials. We testified at city council hearings and before state assembly. So we are doing a lot of work on our families, our members' behalf, and we look forward to continuing to grow this membership base. I also just want to let people know we are doing a right to your city council member and your state assembly member. If you have issues and concerns, and UCC, our leadership team, leadership@saferstreetsny.org, we will follow up and we will make sure your concerns are heard. So we're doing that right now, and we're definitely going to be following up on those by the end of the month. Without further ado, let's talk about what we're here for tonight. So tonight, one of the things we've heard from a lot of our members is, I don't even know who's on my ballot. Does it matter if I even vote? We are a one-party state. Does it matter? Well, it does. What we've learned is that we don't always have a runoff in the primaries, but this year we have a few, and our votes do matter. One of the things that we've realized is that even our elected officials sometimes don't think we show up to vote. So it's very important that as families we vote. So tonight we're going to review the two candidates in the Democratic primary, as I said, for the 73rd district for state assembly. These are our lawmakers. And you can see right here, these are the top 20 bills that state assembly legislation passed in the 2019 session. Many of these significantly impact safety and quality of life. And it's important that we know what's happening. I know some people wrote in and said, I didn't know congestion pricing was. So this is one of the things we want to make you aware of what happened in 2019 and what's on the agenda for 2020. So right now, bail reform was rolled out. That was a big one. Congestion pricing was passed. Marijuana was decriminalized. Might become the first state to decriminalize prostitution and sex work. These are all things that we might want to know about and think about who we're voting in a candidate. In 2020, congestion pricing may be expanded. Marijuana may go from being decriminalized to legalized. And as I said, we may decriminalize, our lawmakers may decriminalize prostitution and sex work. So without further ado, I want to introduce Pamela again and turn things over to her so that she's going to kick off the Q&A tonight with challenger Cameron Koffman. And welcome, Pamela, again, and I'll let you take the lead from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you, Cameron, again, for joining all of the families who took the time out to hear your point of view on a number of important topics. We're really excited to have you, and we're very interested in hearing your thoughts and views on a number of critical things that are impacting all of us. So I'm going to just start with some questions coming directly from this group's leadership team, which is to ask you a very general question, which is, as you think about coming into this role as the challenger, what are your top priorities?
And I'll just reiterate my thanks once more. I am really excited to have this forum to talk about this campaign, and also, knowing we're just a little bit over a month out from the election, and I think a really crucial election given this recovery that the city is about to embark on. And I think that's my top priority right now. Now, before any of this happened, my campaign's slogan was, there's no time to waste, because we believe there's a sense of urgency on issues like climate change, on issues like income inequality, on issues like gun control. But now, with the city in the place that it's in right now, with the state in the place that it's in right now, we need to have full-time, energetic, and passionate leadership to work on this rebuild. And whether it's working to get our education system back up and running, whether it's working to get our small businesses back again, because right now the vacancy rate was 14% before this pandemic hit. I don't even want to know what the vacancy rate is probably going to be at the end of this, but it could be 30%, 35%. 1 in 3 storefronts would be vacant. How can we help these businesses, these small businesses, who are the backbone of our community, get back up? And what about the people who lost their jobs, who haven't received their unemployment benefits yet, who can't pay their rent, who are suffering as well through this? I think the number one priority is having people buy in and believe in New York still. And I mean, I saw the article in the New York Times last week. I'm sure many people saw it, that 40% or so of parts of the Upper East Side, and greater than 40% actually, in some parts of the neighborhood have left. Obviously, many of them are going to be coming back, but who knows for how long, and who knows if they are, committed to being part of this rebuild, which means that those of us who have, called this place home forever, or maybe just recently moved here, but all of us together have to say, that New York is the most special place on earth. And it's a place that we're going to have to fight for. We're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to rebuild here. We're going to have to work to get the federal government to help. And hopefully they do help as much as they can. And that's on our congressional delegation to do that. But regardless, the state and the city leadership need to be a part of this process and need to be consulting the very families, like most of you on this Zoom call, who have roots here, who have decided to make their lives here, who are raising their kids here, who have their parents here. We are going to be in this together. That's my number one priority. Beyond that, the number one issue of this campaign has been ethics reform. I think that we've seen corruption in Albany is something that we've become used to. New York is the most corrupt state in the country. In the past 10 years, 30 plus lawmakers have been indicted or convicted. And I think there's a lot of ways to kind of fix that corruption, ending outside income. So legislators already make a six-figure salary, and then they take income for other jobs. And my opponent, the incumbent, is one of the top 5 outside income earning legislators. I think that's very problematic, creates a conflict of interest, and it also means that our legislators aren't serving us full time. We need people that are working for us every single hour of every single day for their constituents. If we have outside income, that can't happen. Things like term limits, campaign finance reform. I want to help clean up Albany, and I think that we need a new generation of ethical leadership to come in that wants to serve and wants to work with every single interest group, with every single stakeholder to help rebuild New York. I have many more priorities, but I'll let you ask some more questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so another question from our leadership team, why do you think that you'd be a good representative for New York City families in particular?
So I've grown up here my entire life. I was born here. I went to Temple Emmanuel Preschool, went to school on 78th Street at Allen Stevenson, went to Riverdale, have so many roots in this communities through All Souls Soup Kitchen. I played Yorkville basketball. I spent my weekends in Central Park. I love the Upper East Side. My parents love the Upper East Side. I hope to one day have a family here myself. And I think that, as somebody who has grown up here, who really understands this neighborhood, this community, I think that I can best fight for the families because I'm a listener. I understand where people are coming from. Their concerns, whether it's about the small businesses, whether it's about public safety, whether it's about the schools. As someone who is really embedded and tied into this community, I can do that. And I want this job. I want to serve full time and work with people. I think that this campaign, if anything, has been such an informative experience for me in talking to thousands of my neighbors, all the way from the northern ends of the district in the 90s, all the way down to Murray Hill. And going to community board meetings, going to NYPD community council precinct meetings, being at every sort of community event, and just hearing, like, what matters to you? What keeps you up at night? What can the government do to make your life better? I think that we need politicians who want to do that. And so this exact type of forum where I am taking questions from you all, from your families, that's how we can move to better government. I think it's indicative that my opponent did not show up tonight. He refused to come. And not only that, my opponent was invited, was considering coming, and then actually proceeded to ignore Safer Streets when he had attempted to sue me off the ballot for voting in college and run unopposed. Now I'm very excited to announce that we won in court. The First Department Appellate Division handed us a 4-1 victory, and the Court of Appeals decided not to hear the case. They affirmed the ruling. So I will be on the ballot. And now my opponent actually has to engage with constituents. And I think that this is the forum to do that. And I do find it concerning. We're here having a conversation, whatever you might think of all my plans and all my ideas. And I'm very willing to discuss them. I'm happy to be here with you tonight. And I think there is an indication, that he is not here is concerning.
Well, let's jump into some of your views as it relates to the key areas that really worry a number of our families associated with this group. So let's just jump in and talk about crime and public safety. This is a huge concern. Many of the questions that we received in anticipation of this event tonight were specifically around crime and public safety. So I'll just jump in with one question from one of our members, Mira. How will you work on ensuring public safety for your constituents? Specifically, how will you address safety issues related to bail reform, juvenile crime, and the mentally ill homeless?
So I think that clearly, from being around the community and going to all these meetings and living here, I understand this is the number one concern I hear, and something that people are rightfully concerned about. It's the quality of life at heart. Now, I think the bail reform is a very interesting question because, it was passed, and it was passed maybe with not enough input from the law enforcement community, maybe with not enough input from certain people that just live in the state, certain families and constituent stakeholders who didn't have a say in it. But it was there to address a really important problem, a socioeconomic discrepancy that existed, that really got to the root of being an unfair justice system. Our justice system is not meant to be a place where if someone has money and is accused of committing the same crime that someone else is, that the person who has money is out and the person who doesn't is in Rikers. And a place where I think we all know, even being in Rikers for a few weeks or a few months can put somebody on the wrong track for decades in terms of you lose your job, you might lose your health care, it could affect your family, and we cannot afford to do that to people. And so I think the bail reform was enacted to address this very important goal. My concern is, and I think that here's the problem right now in our city and our state, is that there's kind of been an impasse where people are not willing to listen to the folks who are most concerned about public safety, and those concerns have been dismissed and disregarded. And I think that's so unfair, and there are so many legitimate concerns to be had. And I think that everybody on both sides in good faith believes that we all want to end the incarceration cycle. I don't think that anybody wants somebody being held in pretrial detention without there being an effort to make sure that there's no recidivism, without being there an effort to ensure that that person is getting the requisite mental health treatment or getting the requisite resources. And so that's my concern is you're enacting the bail reform and then we don't have a program like Atlas set up, which can provide the very services that are necessary to the people who have been released before trial. Because we want to make sure that we do have those resources in place, that everybody who is released is getting the mental health resources, they're getting the help, and there's ways to supervise them and to have them be part of a program without necessarily, ending or not ending, but ruining their lives for years because you're putting them in Rikers Island. And I think that's the disconnect, that we implemented something and it was not poorly planned. And I appreciate that your organization continues to say, where is Atlas? Why hasn't it been set up yet? What has been the delay on this? If the excuse on the other end is, well, we implemented the bail reform quickly, well, that's not a very good excuse because, whatever someone might think about it, it was definitely an overhaul of the criminal justice system. And if you're doing that, you can't just, knock down parts of the criminal justice system so quickly and then just not be prepared for the consequences. So I do believe in the tenets of the bail reform. I think it was too quick to judge. I'm not happy necessarily the budget this year went the way that it did and made the changes already, because I think with COVID, we didn't get to have the public discussion that was necessary. It was something that I do understand that your organization has really been trumpeting too. On these issues, we need families to be there and to be able to say, this is what I believe, this is what I'm seeing on the ground. This is the data that supports it from the NYPD crime statistics. This is what's been going on, and this is what needs to change. And it definitely did not happen during this budget season. I don't think anybody believes that. But to kind of round out on this question, public safety is so important, and it's something where we need a better and more robust dialogue, and we also need to invest in the programs that actually enhance public safety and doing it in an equitable way. I think Atlas is a great example of that. I think there's other sort of mental health treatments that exist, and really, instead of spending money on something like Thrive, I think we could be, using our mental health dollars more effectively. And I think that a lot of people would agree that that is the way to really deal with problems like this.
Great, thank you. As Nicole mentioned earlier, we've got some emerging legislation that we would like to get your views on, specifically the legalization of marijuana and the decriminalization of the sex trade. What is your viewpoint on those?
So on marijuana legalization, look, it's already decriminalized, and I think it's something. There's a question of revenue, and there's also a question of equity, like just equity. And I think that will be a very important thing to ensure that communities who have been hurt so much by the war on drugs and by policing on marijuana, that they end up getting some of the revenue that comes from that. So that's been an issue. I know Senator Krueger, the state senator that represents this district, has been very strong on it and has made it kind of very hard for it to pass. And I agree with her wholeheartedly on that. And also, understanding that we have to be very concerned about our kids and what they have access to, what's easy for them to obtain. We don't want our kids, smoking marijuana easily in high school, and that no one wants that, and families definitely don't want that to become a thing. But I think that there's ways to legalize it and do so in a smart and safe way, and also in an equitable way, making sure that some of these rights have been wronged. Now, that's something that my opponent and I are relatively in the same boat on. On the decriminalization front, we are not. And he is in favor of full decrim, which essentially will, in my opinion, create such an excess demand for sex work that there is likely to be an increase in sex trafficking. And that's something that is very scary to me, thinking that in our city that there could be a proliferation of sex trafficking. Now, under full decrim, not only those who are actually the sex workers are the ones who are decriminalized, but also the Johns are decriminalized, the owners of brothels. That's not a feasible model. That's not with our community. That's not something that's going to be good when you're talking about having so many people have incentives to engage in human trafficking. Now, I do think that you have sex workers who have been unfairly prosecuted and unfairly hurt by all this, and you have kind of the walking while trans law. So there are things that need to be done, and that's why I'm in favor of partial decrim, the Nordic model. And I've actually, I've spoken with organizations such as the National Organization for Women Now, organizations that have that view on it, and understand that when we do something like this, we need to keep our communities in mind. We need to keep our communities safe. We need to understand sex workers who have been hurt by prosecution, but we also cannot have what would be chaos and a total free-for-all under the model that my opponent supports. And I would say Liz Krueger and I are in agreement on this one as well. She is sponsoring a bill with Assemblymember Tremaine Wright, and it's on a Nordic model partial decrim.
Thank you. I'm going to switch topics now and turn to schools and education, because obviously this is another really important topic for us in general, and now even more so given there's so much uncertainty as it relates to the new school year. So when you think about what's to come potentially for September, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts or your plans or your ideas and how we're going to keep our children safe, especially knowing that there are some schools that are co-located with other schools, and how will we be able to, systemically enforce social distancing in such environments?
Yeah, this is a major concern, and I think that it's something that our elected officials really need to be putting a lot of time into right now, and something that we have. I've been calling up a lot of constituents during the pandemic, just checking in. How are you doing? What's going on? How can we help? Like, what is the government not doing right now that needs to happen? And one interesting conversation I had was with a grandmother who was living with her grandkids during the pandemic. They were quarantined together, and they had an issue of technology. They hadn't received the technology that they needed yet. Their iPads hadn't come, and it was very hard for her grandkids to participate in the lesson. And it was very tough, and she was very frustrated and wanted something to be done on that. So there's the issue of the technology. Then there's the issue, as you said, of how we can actually get people back to school with social distancing. And then there finally, I think there's an issue of funding, which many of you might know that the governor has reserved the right with his budget director to cut a lot of aid to states and to the localities. And if you have the localities, the city is just losing this aid, and the education department is losing this aid. What is the quality of our schools going to become? If anything, if you were to say we'd have bigger class sizes or whatever because of the cuts, well, that's even more problematic given social distancing. I can't speak physically as to what the exact solution is. I've heard all the different ideas of, alternating school days. I've heard the ideas of having some people come in the morning, some people come in the afternoon. I think that the DOE and the city council, it's going to be a long process to figure out exactly how we can get people back to school. But in the meantime, what I'm most concerned about is how are we helping people right now who are in this current situation, who are learning remotely, and what resources are we providing them? I think the iPad purchase didn't seem like it was necessarily the best idea. iPads are only so useful for some parts of education, and it was $1 billion expenditure. It wasn't rolled out that effectively either. You also look at the fact that on remote learning, you have a lot of kids who are now going to have to go to summer school, which I think it does show that at least standards are being upheld. But, how are we going to help kids who have fallen behind now catch up and stay, at their grade level? So I think summer school is going to be a really important thing. And then finally, I think what's worth noting is there has been some research that there are certain components of this that have shown us kind of how we can rethink our education system. Because you do have certain students who might have been afraid of participating in the classroom because of the social pressures of that, and who have now actually been more active participants on Zoom. Students who might not have done well with 9 hours of straight on instruction in a classroom with 35 kids and a teacher, but actually now are doing better with limited contact, but one-on-one with their teacher. So we need to talk to learning specialists, the people who study this, with master's degrees and PhDs in kind of learning and how we can figure out what social distance learning has taught us regarding what we can bring to schools going forward and how we can actually benefit from this. Because I do think that it has shown us what is possible with education. My generation has grown up with technology, and technology is an important part of our lives, and we've adapted to a lot of things. The future is not remote school. I think the socialization that occurs in a school building is so integral to so many people's developments. But that's not to say that the kind of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. school day necessarily has to be the future forever, 5 days a week. And I think that when we rebuild, we should have no preconceived notions about that it should be a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and bringing in the concerns of people like you, people like Nicole, all these families who have kids in our education system and want to know, this is my specific concern about my child. This is how it's been manifested during this coronavirus crisis, and how can we work together to aid this. And I think that having a dialogue and a rebuild actually can lead us to maybe a stronger place in a few years, so long as the governor doesn't have to cut the spending, so long as our Congress people, such as Representative Maloney, who represents me in Congress, they're able to secure the funding we need from the federal government.
And, in thinking about the New York City school system, who do you believe should have complete control over the school system? Do you think it should be the New York City mayor?
Well, I do think that the mayor needs to have a strong amount of control. I think that the story that came out, I believe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, about the mayor manipulating the standards of the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim schools in Brooklyn, and doing so to then get votes to approve mayoral control, I find that to be very concerning. That's not the way that our government should work. And that's not the type of politics that we need to be played. But I do understand the thought that New York City is its own municipality. We need to have a say, and a strong say in it. The counter to that is that the current mayor, at least, has not really done a good job managing the schools. I for one, am not a fan of the current chancellor. And if you have total control from the city and limited state oversight, how can you stop that? So, not to be wishy-washy, but the fact of the matter is, it really depends on the mayoral administration, and obviously you can't legislate like that. And given that's the case, I think you kind of got to be in a middle ground.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to turn our attention to some questions pertaining to general matters related to quality of life. And Nicole earlier talked about congestion pricing. And, this impacts a lot of people, right? Specifically New Yorkers who have to get from one place to another, some of whom are disabled or elderly, and it's more difficult for them to get around. What is your viewpoint on that?
So this was really a major issue early on in this campaign. It's still very important, obviously. It's been a little bit out of the news because of everything else going on. But, my opponent, the current assembly member, was a co-sponsor of the congestion pricing bill and wanted there to be no exemptions for people who lived in and around 60th Street. And co-sponsored a bill that was a bad bill, because all the bill said was, we're going to draw a line at 60th Street. We're going to charge $11.52 when it's crossed, and this is going to go into effect in 2021. But we're not going to decide any of the details about who gets exempt, any of the details about if there's peak or off-peak, all these important things in terms of, and also toll credits, which I'll get into in a second. We're going to let a 6-member commission, who is unelected, an appointed commission, make all of the decisions about that, which I think have much more of an effect on the people who live in our neighborhood. Those who live in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 80s, whatever, are much more affected than people who live in other parts of the city by congestion pricing, for sure. How could you have an unelected group where there's not a representative that's representing the group most affected, and they're not even subscribing to open meeting laws with the MTA? So there's no transparency rules. It could be totally closed door sessions. I find it almost laughable that the current assembly member could have passed a bill like that that's going to have that effect on our constituents. Because as you noted, there are plenty of people who need to cross that line to get to doctor's appointments. If you live in the 50s and you have an appointment at Lenox Hill, if you live in the 70s, you have an appointment at NYU. Elderly people who need to take taxis. That's how they're going to get to their doctor's appointments. Or maybe people, with kids that need to take a car for a certain thing. I don't think that the congestion that exists in Manhattan, and don't get me wrong, it's horrible. It's been the one reprieve of this pandemic has been that there has not been a lot of traffic. And it's crazy kind of walking, my office is on 57th and 1st, walking to the office, and it's, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and not seeing a backlog of traffic up to the 59th Street Bridge for once. So the congestion exists, but I don't think the congestion comes from people that are actually living in the residential areas. The congestion is coming from people who are driving into the city. And if that's the case, then why have a bill where we're going to be crediting the tolls back? So under the current system that some people are recommending, they would say that if you were a commuter that came in from Long Island and you took the RFK bridge in and you paid that $8 toll on the RFK bridge, that $8 was credited back to you as you pay the $11.52 for congestion pricing. So you're really only paying $11.52. Meanwhile, if you're coming from 75th Street for a doctor's appointment at NYU, you don't get any toll credit, you don't get any exemption. So the incentives is totally skewed under that mechanism. And so I apologize for getting very passionate about congestion pricing. It's a somewhat arcane transportation issue, but it's really going to affect people's quality of lives. And it's going to be something, it's going to be increase of traffic in the 60s and increase of traffic in the 50s, because as we all know, if there's a toll, what do people do? They try to avoid it. And people are going to try and park on 61st, 62nd, 63rd, 64th, so on, amalgamate into one giant delivery truck or walk down a few blocks. And our residential neighborhoods are going to be affected by something that really is targeted at commercial traffic that has nothing to do with people that are going about their lives here on the Upper East Side or in Sutton Place or Midtown.
Thank you. I'm going to read a question from Debbie, one of our members. Currently, there is no place for a car to pull over to the curb on the block where I live, 55th Street, due to the addition of a bike lane. How will you make kids safe from bikers when kids need to exit a taxi, Uber, or a car on streets with bike lanes? I have seen way too many close calls in front of my building. Bikes are going the wrong way. Motorized bikes are going quickly. Some bikes are not stopping at a red light, and children are just being kids despite parents' warnings. How will you help in this situation?
Well, I appreciate the question from Debbie, and it's something that I hear frequently brought up at NYPD Community Council precinct meetings, talking especially at the 17th precinct where she lives. Captain Wynn talks about that a lot, because I think that we are in an interesting situation with our pedestrian safety and with our bike safety, because we built these bike lanes because they're very important. We need to have greener infrastructure in the city. We need to decrease our reliance on cars, fighting climate change and also fighting congestion. And we also need to ensure that this city is really planned for the 21st century. It's not right now. Having bike lanes like most other major cities, having electric scooters, so long as it's done in a safe and kind of accountable way, I think is the future. And that's very important to recognize. But the problem is when we're doing this, we also have to be concerned about the safety of pedestrians. And I've heard from so many people, especially elderly people, who are crossing the street, say on First Avenue, which has that bike lane, and bikes are going in both directions, and you have kind of the island crosswalk set up. There are so many close calls that I witness every day. And then there are, of course, the actual accidents that happen. So we do need to have a serious conversation with the Department of Transportation, with the community board, and then with both the state and the city elected officials about how we can create an infrastructure that does create the bike lanes. And especially now, by the way, I think biking has gone up. I'm seeing so many people on city bikes because not that many people are taking cars right now, and no one really that I know is taking the subway and bus unless they absolutely have to. They're an essential worker, or they absolutely have something essential to go to, which means that people are biking around. The biking has proliferated, which is good for the city so long as we can keep it safe. So I'm advocating for a large public education campaign where we actually ensure, we work with bikers to ensure that safety is something that they're aware of, that they're riding in the correct direction, that they're actually stopping at red lights. That's all good things. That's what we need to have happening. There's currently no sort of public education campaign. And then also, I think the mayor started this with Vision Zero, and fatalities have gone down, but we also need to have a public education campaign for cars to ensure that bicyclists are safe as they are riding in traffic. So my problem with all of this is there hasn't been a good dialogue. You have a demonization on both sides, where people who are the bicyclists will demonize anybody who has a car. And then you have people who are pedestrians who will demonize anybody on a bike. I think we're all in this together. And I think we all recognize, sidewalks are kind of our highways, and pedestrians are the most important part of the city, but we also need to get people to move around. And we want to do it in as most energy efficient way as possible. So the back and forth ad hominem attacks that we see now in all of these discussions is not what we need. And I'm here to bring a new and fresh perspective, and one where I'm willing to listen to everyone and let everyone have a seat at the table.
Great. Related to this topic, Robert, one of our members, would like to know, how will you bolster other micro-mobility options outside of City Bike's curbside space monopoly?
Well, so the curbside space monopoly is very interesting. And I think that now with e-bikes and scooters coming into New York City, and it's going to be a thing, the state just legalized it, we can have a more serious conversation about what else we can use that curbside space for. And I think scooter docking stations is a very interesting thing to go with. I also think, and we haven't talked about small businesses yet, but I think we're going to start seeing more curbside space turned into, pseudo sidewalk cafes. We see it in other major cities. San Francisco's done it a lot. Where I went to college in New Haven, they did a lot there as well. I think that's a great way to kind of let restaurants, especially in this era where we're going to need to have outdoor seating as much as possible, you can start having that exist too. So I'm all for considering things like scooter docking stations, considering things like actually letting restaurants have sidewalk cafes and parking spaces. We need to be creative and innovative with what we're doing with this space. It's a limited amount of space. And I think what we're doing right now is clearly not enough, and it's not been effective. So I welcome those new changes.
Great. You had mentioned earlier about small businesses, and you've mentioned it again. So it's clearly something that's on your mind. Perhaps you could share your point of view with the members of our group.
Yeah. If we look at what was going on before COVID-19, we were already facing a small business crisis. I said this already, you know, the vacancy rate was 1 in 7. That is high. It's higher than it had been in a while. And it also, one thing that I think is really indicative of the problem is, if you look at the Department of City Planning, they put out a report back in, I think it was November. The report came out and it showed that despite rent going down on 3rd Avenue in the past few years, that the vacancy had still gone up. So there is a rent problem, and especially now there's a rent problem. But it's beyond that. It's the entire small business climate that we have created in this city and in this state. So I'm advocating for beyond, you know, I have certain COVID-19 related things, such as working on a plan to make sure that any business that has been unable to have revenue from this has had their rent canceled for those months they were not able to have the revenue, so long as they did not fire any of their employees. So it's kind of a, you know, you make sure that no one is able to use this as a sort of profit. Everybody can win. And then obviously acknowledging you have certain property owners who then might miss that rent and they have a mortgage to pay. Well, then going back in the same way, you need to make sure that the mortgage as well is delayed, or some sort of remedy. It's an entire system. We have an economic ecosystem, and kind of, there's not one which solution, but I think if you let it go all the way up the chain, you can actually fix it. But beyond the COVID-19 related things, we need to look at things such as the commercial rent tax, where people are paying a 4% tax on just their rent, storefronts below 96th Street. So our neighborhood is especially affected by that. It's already hard to run a business paying those taxes. The property tax system in our city is rigged and set up in a way where property values continue to get assessed higher almost every single year. That's not something that I think anybody is happy about, and it makes it really hard to own a business. And then the amount of kind of inspections and fines and fees that both our city and our state impose. I've talked to Andrew Ridgie, who runs the New York City Hospitality Alliance, multiple times. And one thing that they've been talking about, and I think they're right, is we need to have kind of a recalculation and kind of a start from square one about our regulatory schemes regarding small businesses. Because the last thing we want to do is create so many regulations that it's impossible for these businesses to exist, and you know, to not be fined and to not have to pay taxes, all these different things. It makes it very hard for a small business. And as someone who's grown up here, the small businesses are one of the reasons why I think this is one of the most special communities. I love businesses that have been here for 25, 30 years. I love going to restaurants like Three Guys, J.G. Mellon's, that have been here forever, Neil's Coffee Shop. These are the businesses that are the backbone. These are people that have put their lives' work into a dream. Every small business in some ways is a dream, and have put their lives' work into it. And now they're facing a crisis, and they were facing a crisis before. So we need to be very cognizant of that. And I think, at least for most of the people on this Zoom, I would think, are living in New York because we value the community here. And if we wanted to live in a place of big box retailers, of Targets and Walmarts and Home Depots, then we wouldn't be living in the Upper East Side or in Sutton Place or in Murray Hill. We value our local businesses, and we need so much action on that right now. And that's why, you know, my message of full-time leadership, full-time representation, I think rings especially true when you are running for district attorney, running for assembly, and lawyer representing insurance companies. How can you be spending enough time to really help fight for our small businesses?
Great. Thank you. And thanks for sharing your point of view on all of these topics. I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Thanks so much, Pamela. I appreciate that. And thanks, Cameron, for sharing your viewpoints on a variety of topics. All of these, except for a couple, were really from our viewers tonight. And so I think it's very meaningful to answer the questions. We did, like I said, get a statement from Dan Court, from Assemblymember Court. And so I'm going to read that now because I do think it's important that everyone has a chance to take a look at both candidates and decide, you know, who really aligns the most with their priorities and what they want in a lawmaker in Albany. So Dan wrote, my priorities include 1, continuing the fight for election reform. I've introduced legislation to reform our elections from top to bottom, including early voting, reforming our poll worker system, and demanding transparency from the Board of Elections. Most importantly, we need to bring the automatic voter registration bill to a vote. This is critical legislation and shouldn't end session without taking it up. 2, COVID-19 recovery. My office has worked with dozens of constituents who have been unable to access the unemployment benefits they're entitled to. We have to revamp our unemployment system. It's been broken for years. I've called for hearings into the state's response to COVID-19, and I'll be holding the Department of Labor accountable for this failure. We also need to raise revenue in order to fund the recovery. I'm supportive of a variety of measures to do this, including increasing taxes for billionaires and ultramillionaires, instituting a pied-à-terre tax, as well as wholly revamping our property tax system to ensure that luxury apartments are being assessed fairly. Finally, we need to ensure that the most vulnerable workers are protected during this pandemic. I've been collaborating with the Laundry Workers Center to ensure the laundry workers have access to PPE and sick leave, that laundromats are able to implement social distancing policies to stay open. Number 3, decarcerating our criminal justice system and ensuring fairness. We know that incarceration does not make us safer. The vast majority of people who are incarcerated will return to their communities without anything they need to be able to live a productive life. As COVID-19 ravages our incarcerated populations, we must ensure that every prison sentence isn't a death sentence. We need to look at instituting elder parole, reforming our good time system, and ending solitary confinement. We also need to ensure that we aren't over-policing communities of color during this pandemic. I've introduced legislation that would repeal the mask ban. In a time when face masks are an essential component of our public health strategies, this is just common sense. However, this section of the law is being used to harass and arrest Black and Hispanic New Yorkers across the city. Number 4, reforming our sexual assault laws. Believe it or not, the word consent is not defined in New York state law. When Harvey Weinstein's jury asked for a definition during their deliberation, they were told to use their common sense. This is not acceptable. I'm proud to be working with Joyce Short at Consent Awareness, Jessica Mann, and Rose McGowan to draft legislation to change this. Number 5, ending the scourge of dangerous driving. We have all heard the stories of the devastation that is wrought by out-of-control drivers on our streets. Even after years of Vision Zero, hundreds of New Yorkers die each year due to traffic violence. Just yesterday, a young man was killed by a driver while walking in a crosswalk at 97th Street, an entirely preventable tragedy. Now is the time to implement bold policies that will fundamentally change the structure of our streets. I'm proud to have worked with Families for Safer Streets on this issue. I've introduced legislation that would strengthen our reckless driving statute, clarifying that what is prohibited in dangerous driving. I've advocated for East Side families for years. As an attorney, I started a legal clinic for East Siders facing eviction, ensuring they had legal advice and representation to keep them in their homes. I served for 8 years on Community Board 8, including as the co-chair of the Transportation Committee and chair of the 2nd Avenue Subway Committee. In the Assembly, I've continued to work to expand our public transit system, secured $1 billion to fund construction on the 2nd Avenue Subway. I created a fund to help business owners retrofit their boilers to those that burn cleaner fuel, reducing carbon output and cleaning up our air quality. I'm proud to have opened PS 527, the public school that both of my children have attended, and Yorkville East Middle School. I want to improve the middle school application process for District 2 families. I've been a strong champion of access to abortion and contraception as a co-sponsor of both the RHA and the BOSS bill. Of the bills listed in that article, I'm proud to be the prime sponsor of number 14, decriminalizing gravity knives. And I'm also proud to be a leader on number 5. Going to share my screen here. Sorry, everyone. So you can see the numbers. So I'm proud to sponsor number 14 and proud to be a leader on number 5. I was the first legislator to call for public hearings on this and organize my colleagues to push for these hearings, which resulted in a landmark legislation protecting workers across the state. I also wrote legislation ending cash bail in New York State, number 13, and led negotiations on the final bill that was passed. I was a co-sponsor on every other bill on the list, except for 11, which doesn't apply to New York City, and number 18. It is essential that we continue legislating, and I've been pushing leadership to bring us back into session remotely if necessary. Additionally, we wanted to share some of Dan's views on recently passed legislation that our members have asked about, that Cameron was good enough to answer live tonight, and also some things that are pending and down the pipe, and what state legislators seem to be really hot topics right now for them on social media and in the news. So first, New York bail reform. Dan says, in Albany, I drafted far-reaching bail legislation that became the foundation of reforms passed this year. Though we eliminated cash bail at the state level for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, the reforms are not far-reaching enough. Court continues, rolling back bail reform is unconscionable, as it undoes the process we painstakingly negotiated. On congestion pricing, we received a lot of questions on that. Dan says, I've always supported congestion pricing and I support it now. I think it's on a whole a good policy for the overwhelming majority of my constituents and the city of New York. I don't support carve-outs for any affected group or any affected entity. I think that defeats the purpose of congestion pricing, which is not solely or even primarily about funding. It's about what's the right policy for the city of New York to reduce congestion and make conditions more drivable and more walkable for people throughout Manhattan in the central business district. That should be the primary focus. On decriminalizing and in the future potentially legalizing marijuana, it is past time, Dan says, it is past time for New York to legalize marijuana. Legalization is the end goal and we will fight for it next year in Albany. And also, I think we'll be honest, it's an important revenue source for the state of New York, but that's secondary. On decriminalizing sex workers and prostitution, this proposed, just so everyone has a background, this proposed legislation, this is not Dan's words, would remove penalties for selling and buying sexual services, just one part of full decriminalization. The decrim bill also strikes prohibitions on keeping a house, so it gets rid of prohibitions on keeping a house or place for lewd persons. This would ban landlords from evicting sex workers from their place of work or residence or both, or in other cases, to decline rent to sex workers at all. Dan says on this topic, this is a taboo topic, but it can't be taboo anymore. So hopefully sharing that, it's unfortunate Dan did not want to participate live because I think hearing a person live is really helpful, but hopefully we gave you information that allows you to look at both of these candidates this evening. And before we wrap up, Cameron, I think it's, since you were here live and after hearing what Dan wrote, I'd like to give you the opportunity on two things. You know, one, I'd like you to share, just to sum up, what differentiates you from the incumbent who's been in office since 2011 or 2011, I think, and what specifically, how can you put families first in New York City?
Well, I think the most important point to make is that I am running to represent this district full time. Assemblymember Court is running for district attorney right now for 2021 and is also a lawyer representing insurance companies. Assemblymember Court was the only Upper East Side elected official to miss Councilmember Kalos's town hall back at I think it was the beginning of April. Every other elected was there. Carolyn Maloney was even there, as well as Speaker Corey Johnson. And how is that kind of present leadership? He has been fundraising for his DA campaign. In fact, missing a community board 6 meeting a couple weeks ago instead to have a DA candidate forum. So I think that the most important thing to emphasize is I want to fight for the Upper East Side, for Midtown, for Sutton Place, for Murray Hill every day. And that's the only job that I want. That's what I want to do. I want to be there for the community. And I think it's very concerning, you know, in a time where we're facing such an important crisis as a city, to have someone who wants to be a part-time representative, who doesn't want to give the 100% focus. I can talk about certain policies, you know, we articulated some sensitive differences on whether it's on decrim, whether it's on congestion pricing. I also agree with him on a lot of things, such as raising more revenue. I do think we need a billionaires, ultra millionaires tax, a stock transfer tax, these revenue raising mechanisms to ensure that New York is not cutting spending on healthcare. I agree with him on things like marijuana. I agree with what he said about election reform, but I think that it is somewhat funny that he is saying that. And that was the first thing you put in your note, talking about making it easier for people to vote, when he just engaged in a long lawsuit against me only because I voted in college, claiming that had meant that I was not a New York resident despite serving jury duty, despite paying taxes here, coming back home all the time, having doctor's appointments here. How could you say you want it easier for people to vote when you were trying to punish a student for voting? I do agree, though, that in this time of the pandemic, we need to make it as easy as possible to vote and to reform our election system as much as possible, especially with the November elections around the corner and being so important. To your final question, I think the most important thing is to have dialogues like these, to actually be willing to engage and to listen to people. And look, you had Councilmember Kalos on very recently. I know you have Borough President Gail Brewer. I know you have some other candidates coming on. I don't know who's coming to your forum next week. But I think that the ability to engage in a discussion and to really say, this is what the community needs. I see this other thing. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to listen. And I think that right now our families need someone who just wants to listen, who wants to hear what matters, and then can come and make the decisions and propose the legislation that's necessary to address many of those problems. So I appreciate you giving the opportunity to hear what you are all concerned about, and I appreciate being able to talk to you about what I care about, what my values are, what I stand for. And I think this is how our democracy should work. This is how our election should work. It's the first competitive primary here since 2002. And I just appreciate being involved in it. And I think it's unfortunate that my opponent was not here tonight.
Thank you so much, Cameron. And we do really appreciate you showing up for families. I know one of the things that we've heard too often is families don't feel heard. Showing up is a good start. And to hope tonight that everyone that's listening really got a viewpoint or got to understand some of the viewpoints of the Challenger Cameron Koffman, and also the incumbent Dan Court. Again, these are two people that whoever is, the Democratic winner will face off with a potentially Republican challenger and potentially be our future lawmakers. So if you are, happy with bail reform or don't like certain parts of congestion pricing, now is the time to voice that, whether it's to Dan Court or to Cameron Koffman. I think it's important that candidates come and listen to us and allow all of you to be heard, because tonight 90% of the questions were from the viewing audience and many from our members who have great concerns about some of the things on the horizon. We are very concerned about the impact of legalizing marijuana when there's already a dust bowl of pot smoking that goes on next to all of our children's playgrounds in Central Park. We are extremely concerned how congestion pricing has impacted us as residents when we have to drive our child to a hockey game or a special needs program, and the only way to get them there is that car that we bought for that purpose. So I will say today, I was out, you only see traffic going to and from the bridge. The other lanes for local traffic were completely empty. So I appreciate Cameron talking about his viewpoint on congestion pricing. And I think that all of you, whether it's decriminalization of sex work or marijuana, congestion pricing, wherever you stand, pro or against it, now is a great time to be heard, and also down the road. So I really hope you all will go to both Cameron Koffman's website, and Cameron, can you share what that is?
It's CameronKoffman.com, Koffman.
Perfect. And Dan Court's website, and we will share their websites with you tomorrow as a follow-up. Yes?
That Assemblymember Court does not have a campaign website. He has not put up any policies online. In fact, I was excited to hear what was shared with us tonight, because it's the first kind of, I've heard policies from him. Every other time that we've had any sort of discussion in the public, it's been personal attacks, his lawsuit, and has not been willing to engage on any issues. So if people wanted to search, for Dan Court's campaign website, one would not exist.
Sure. And I actually think there's his campaign website is currently for Manhattan DA, where he has a lot of his viewpoints, and we learned a lot of information. So thank you for that. I want to thank everyone for coming. I mean, we're really just trying to get information out, and we know there's a lot of different viewpoints on this call. Some of them are members who we know that they really want a better, more livable New York City. And the laws that are made in Albany have truly had a significant impact on public safety. Things that were implemented impacted our daily lives, our quality of life. And New Yorkers for Safer Streets is really standing up for parents and saying, we've had enough, we have a voice, and we deserve to be heard. And so we will keep doing that. Next week, we are super excited. We are going to have Gail Brewer on, our Manhattan Borough President, to talk what's going on with COVID, the updates, what's the path ahead now. We heard from Ben Kalos recently, council member. But let's hear from Gail next week and hear what's new, what's happening. When is New York going to reopen again? Hopefully we can talk to her about that and what it means for us in the future. Next, we also will be talking to one of the candidates for Congress, Suraj Patel, and he is running for Congress on Manhattan's east side and into Brooklyn and a little bit of Long Island City, I think. We'll put that out to you. If that's your neighborhood, want to attend, we want to know what's going to happen at the federal government for all of us, what the future holds. How is New York City going to get past this and move forward? I want to thank Pamela for leading the Q&A. I think that having so many mothers and even some fathers who call me daily to talk about the issues, the bicycle issue. I spent an hour on the phone with a father today whose kid was hit by a bike. The marijuana thing has been a constant phone call. So we at New Yorkers for Safer Streets are on the phones with parents like you every day to listen and hear what you have to say. And we're going to keep working for you and fighting for what families want. Whatever that may be, you let us know, keep us in the loop, and we'll keep meeting with people like Cameron Koffman. We'll keep reaching out to Assemblymember Court, and we will keep telling them what we need and want. What do we need from all of you? We need you to go and vote. Whoever you want to be your elected official, wherever you are. For those of you that went to be with family, because that's the right thing to do right now, for those of us in New York City, everyone can get an absentee ballot still. It is never more crucial time to vote than now. This election is going to be very meaningful and impact our lives in New York City, whether you know you're going to stay or you may leave. I can't tell you how much I hope all of you will vote in the primary and then vote again in November for the candidate that you truly believe represents what it aligns with your values and needs. So with that said, we hope to see you next week for some more post-COVID updates. And thank you so much, Cameron, for being here tonight. There's nothing better than having a live person on to share their viewpoints. And thanks, to everyone on tonight for coming. And we hope you found this valuable, and we will be sending you a recording so that you can play this back and figure out which candidate is right for you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great night.